I'm Major Cassandra Hartley, 33 years old, and I built my career from nothing but grit, discipline, and a refusal to coast on my family name. For years, I backed my father, stood by him, supported him, defended him, because that's what you do for the people you love. But the day he laughed at me in a joint briefing and told me to sit down, the day he dismissed me in front of half the room, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been brushed aside or humiliated by someone you'd given everything to? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I dive into what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your worth after someone tried to shrink you, hit like and subscribe. What came next even I didn't see coming. I grew up on bases, moving every 2 to 3 years as my father rose through the ranks. By the time I turned 10, he was already a lieutenant colonel. By high school, he had his first star. The houses changed, the landscapes shifted from desert to pine forests to flat coastal plains, but the rhythm stayed the same. Reveille at 0600, the smell of fresh-pressed uniforms, the sharp cadence of boots on pavement outside our quarters. He taught me discipline, structure, and how to read a room full of officers. I learned to stand straight during ceremonies, to keep my voice level when addressing senior personnel, to understand the invisible language of rank insignia and unit patches. I gave him loyalty, obedience, and the kind of admiration only a military kid can have. I believed he was building something in me, shaping me for a purpose I'd understand later. He gave me expectations, not affection, but I didn't understand that imbalance until much later. Dinner conversations revolved around tactical doctrine or leadership principles. He'd quiz me on chain of command structures while my mother set the table. When I brought home good grades, he'd nod once and say, "That's baseline." When I won a school debate competition, he said, "Rhetoric matters less than action." I kept trying harder, thinking the praise would come eventually. He assumed I'd stay a civilian or at most join as enlisted. I heard him tell his peers at backyard barbecues that I'd probably go into teaching or healthcare, something appropriate for a woman with her intelligence. He never asked what I wanted. I quietly worked toward an officer slot, taking ROTC courses in college, excelling in physical fitness tests, studying leadership theory and military history until I could recite joint doctrine in my sleep. I commissioned as an Air Force second lieutenant at 23. I sent him updates, photos from training, academic awards. He gave brief nods. I emailed him when I finished survival school, when I qualified expert on the range, when my commander wrote me a letter of commendation for a training exercise. His responses came in single sentences: "Good. Keep working. Don't get comfortable." I gave enthusiastic reports. He gave silence. My mother would call separately to tell me he was proud, but I never heard it from him. I specialized in reconnaissance and precision long gun work. The path wasn't conventional. Most officers in my year group went into operations, logistics, or acquisitions. I requested assignments that put me in the field, that required additional schools, that built skill sets the Air Force didn't advertise in recruiting brochures. I spent months in advanced marksmanship programs, learned to calculate windage and elevation adjustments in my sleep, studied meteorology and ballistics until I could predict bullet trajectory in shifting conditions. Years of rotational deployments, classified schools, and joint tasking qualifications eventually earned me a reputation inside certain circles, a reputation that never reached him. I worked with Army Special Operations units, trained alongside Marine Scout snipers, participated in exercises where the participants never appeared in official photographs. My performance reviews included phrases like "exceptionally discreet" and "demonstrates mature judgment beyond her years." By the time I made captain at 28, I'd been read into programs my father's clearance level couldn't touch. At home, I was still his daughter, not Captain Cassandra Hartley, and certainly not Ghost 13, the quiet specialist teams requested for operations requiring both clearance and calm hands. The call sign came from a Navy SEAL I'd supported on a joint operation. He'd watched me take 3 consecutive shots in low visibility, each one precisely on target, and said I moved through missions like a ghost. The 13 was for the number of critical operations I'd supported without a single compromise. Within certain communities, the name meant reliability. Outside those circles, it meant nothing. I showed up for every holiday dinner when able, took leave to fly home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, sat through meals where my father dominated conversation with stories from his command, sent money to help my parents renovate the house when my mother mentioned the roof needed work, took care of errands during his temporary duty assignments, driving my mother to appointments, handling paperwork, making sure utilities stayed current. He offered me occasional critiques of my career, rarely a compliment. Over coffee one morning, he told me I should consider transferring to a more visible career field. At a family gathering, he introduced me to a brigadier general friend as my daughter. She does intelligence work, not quite sure what exactly. When I mentioned a successful mission in vague terms, he said, "Support roles are necessary, I suppose." I kept trying to earn approval that never came. By the time I made captain, I'd developed a professional identity completely separate from his influence. My performance reviews came from officers who understood the work I did. My mentors were people who operated in the same classified spaces. But every time I went home, I felt myself shrinking back into the role of the daughter who couldn't quite measure up. I'd catch myself explaining my career choices, defending decisions I'd already made, seeking validation from someone who'd decided years ago what I was worth. The imbalance crystallized during a conversation when I was 30. I'd come home after a particularly difficult deployment, one I couldn't discuss in detail. I was tired, running on minimal sleep, still processing things I'd seen. My father asked how work was going, and I gave him the same sanitized overview I always did. He interrupted me mid-sentence. "You know, Cassandra, at your age I was commanding a squadron. Real leadership, real responsibility. You're a captain now. When are you going to pursue actual command?" I looked at him across the kitchen table. My mother had stepped out to take a phone call. It was just the two of us, and I realized I'd spent nearly a decade trying to translate my worth into terms he'd accept. It hadn't worked. It was never going to work. "My work is classified, sir," I said quietly. "I can't give you details." "That's convenient," he said, not quite smiling. "Every time I ask about your career, it's classified. Maybe if you'd chosen a more traditional path, you'd have something concrete to show for it." I didn't respond. I finished my coffee and excused myself. Upstairs in my childhood bedroom, unchanged since high school except for the awards I'd never bothered to display, I stared at the ceiling and recognized something I'd been avoiding. He wasn't going to change. The approval I'd been chasing didn't exist. And continuing to pursue it was costing me something essential. I stopped calling weekly. Stopped reporting every milestone. I still showed up for major holidays, still maintained surface-level civility, but I pulled back from the exhausting work of trying to make him understand. The only approval that mattered was mine, and the people who actually knew my work already respected it. That had to be enough. By the time I made captain at 28, he outright dismissed my community. We were sitting in his home office, him behind the desk in his study that displayed his career in neat rows, photos with presidents, commendations in dark frames, unit patches from every assignment. I'd mentioned a recent school I'd completed, trying to offer context without violating classification restrictions. "Intel and recon aren't real command tracks," he said, not looking up from the paperwork he was reviewing. "You're building a resume with no command time. That's going to limit you eventually." I kept my expression neutral. "My career field values different competencies." "Your career field is a dead end," he said. He finally looked at me, and there was something dismissive in his gaze, something I'd seen him use on junior officers who'd disappointed him. "You're what, 6 years in? 7? And you're still a captain with no prospect of leading anything significant." I had a squadron by this point. "Different career progression timelines," I said. He began rewriting family history, painting himself as the sole architect of every achievement in the household. At a retirement ceremony for one of his peers, I overheard him telling a group of officers about how he'd instilled discipline in his household from day one. He talked about raising a daughter in the military lifestyle, teaching her resilience, preparing her for the challenges of military life. He didn't mention that I was military myself. When someone asked if I'd followed in his footsteps, he said, "In her own way, I suppose." Different standards these days. He canceled our calls, skipped pinning ceremonies, and brushed off anything I achieved. When I made captain, he was scheduled to attend the ceremony. My mother had already bought her plane ticket. 2 days before, he called to say something had come up, a meeting he couldn't reschedule. My mother came alone, apologizing for him, making excuses I no longer believed. When I was selected for a joint interagency assignment, something I'd competed against 40 other qualified officers to receive, he said, "Those postings are for people who don't have operational futures. It's where they send officers who aren't competitive for command." I'd called specifically to tell him about the selection, thinking maybe this would register as significant. His response arrived via text message 3 hours later. His peers, now mostly other generals, fed his belief that only traditional command paths mattered. Their children became pilots or acquisitions officers, following visible career trajectories that translated easily into cocktail party conversation. Mine became a quiet operator in a community they didn't respect. I'd see him at military functions occasionally, watch him hold court with other senior officers, and realize I was absent from his narrative entirely. He'd talk about his career, his command philosophy, his perspective on current military challenges. He never mentioned me. He introduced me to visiting officers as my kid, she works in intel or something. We were at a change of command ceremony, and a 2-star I didn't recognize asked how his family was doing. My father gestured vaguely in my direction and used those exact words. The general looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to elaborate. I just smiled and said, something like that. My father had already moved on to a different conversation. He started calling me by my first name instead of my rank while in uniform, even around other officers. Small cuts that revealed something changing. At a formal dinner, with me in service dress and him in his dress blues, he introduced me to a colonel as Cassandra, my daughter. The colonel glanced at my rank insignia, then at my father, clearly confused by the breach in protocol. I extended my hand and said, "Captain Hartley, sir. Good to meet you." The colonel recovered smoothly, but my father's expression tightened. Later, in the parking lot, he said, "You don't need to be so rigid about rank at family events." "That wasn't a family event," I said. "That was an official military function. I wore my uniform because it was appropriate." "You wore your uniform to make a point," he said. I looked at him, this man I'd spent my entire life trying to impress, and felt something shift. "I wore my uniform because I earned the right to wear it. Same as you." He didn't respond, just walked to his car. My mother touched my arm gently, a gesture of support she couldn't voice, and followed him. I stood in the parking lot under sodium lights, watching them drive away, and understood that the disrespect wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. He needed me to be less than him, and my success, however invisible to him, threatened something in his self-concept. The moments accumulated. A missed birthday call. A dismissive comment about desk jobs when I mentioned working long hours on a classified project. His habit of changing the subject whenever someone else brought up my career. The time he told my cousin Mia that I'd never really figured out what I wanted to do, while I was standing 15 feet away in uniform with a chest full of ribbons he'd never asked about. I stopped expecting anything different. The disrespect had become so routine that its absence would have been remarkable. A multi-branch briefing brought my unit, Navy teams, and senior leadership into the same auditorium at MacDill Air Force Base. Joint operations had become more frequent, and this particular briefing covered emerging theater challenges that required cross-service coordination. The room held maybe 200 people: Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, mix of enlisted and officer, everyone from E6 up through 08. I sat in the second row with my unit commander, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, and 2 other officers from our operations section. My father was somewhere in the back with the other general officers, in the elevated seating area reserved for 07 and above. I'd seen him when I walked in, caught his eye briefly. He'd given me the same nod he'd give any junior officer, nothing personal in it. The briefing was technical, focused on intelligence integration and targeting protocols. About 40 minutes in, the doors at the rear of the auditorium opened. A Navy captain walked in mid-presentation, moving with the direct purposefulness of someone who didn't have time for protocols. He was built like most SEALs I'd worked with, compact and efficient, with close-cropped hair and eyes that scanned the room with tactical assessment. Captain Marcus Hale, though I didn't know his name yet. The presenter, an Air Force colonel, paused mid-sentence. The Navy captain didn't apologize for the interruption. He walked to the front of the room, surveyed the audience, and spoke clearly enough that everyone could hear. I need a sniper with TS/SCI and compartmental access. Now. The room went silent. That level of clearance, combined with that specific skill set, narrowed the pool significantly. Most people in the auditorium had top-secret clearance. Far fewer had sensitive compartmented information access. Even fewer had the additional compartmental clearances he was referencing, the kind that came with specific programs and required separate background investigations. I stood up. Calm, professional. I didn't look around to gauge reactions, didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what he needed and knew I was qualified. My father's voice cut across the room before the Navy captain could respond. Sit down. You're a nobody. He laughed when he said it. Not a chuckle, but a full laugh that echoed in the sudden silence. Officers turned in their seats. Some looked at me, some looked at him. No one else made a sound. I remained standing. I kept my eyes on the Navy captain, who was now looking directly at me, his expression unreadable. I didn't acknowledge my father's comment. I didn't sit down. The SEAL captain's gaze shifted briefly past me to where my father sat, then back to me. His voice was level, professional. Call sign. I answered clearly, projecting enough that everyone could hear. Ghost 13. My father's face drained of color. I saw it happen in my peripheral vision, watched the transformation from smug dismissal to shocked recognition. He wasn't part of the channels that handled my community. He wasn't cleared for the programs I'd worked. But he knew the name. In certain circles, among people who dealt with classified operations that never appeared in official records, Ghost 13 meant something specific. He knew exactly what it meant, and he knew exactly what I had done. Not the details, those were beyond his clearance, but the scale. The level of trust required to earn a call sign like that. The operations it represented. The captain gave a single nod. She's with me. He looked at Lieutenant Colonel Rourke. I'm pulling her for immediate tasking. You'll get official notification within the hour. Rourke nodded. Understood, sir. The captain turned and walked toward the exit. I followed, moving down the aisle without looking back. I felt the weight of 200 stairs, heard the absolute silence I left behind. My father tried to speak. I heard him start to say something, but the captain's statement had ended the discussion. There was nothing left to debate. In the hallway outside, the captain slowed his pace until I caught up. He glanced at me, something that might have been respect in his expression. Your father, he asked quietly. Yes, sir. He didn't know? No, sir. Different clearance levels. Different channels. He nodded slowly. That was a hell of a way to find out. We walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, I've read your file. Worked with people who've worked with you. You're exactly what I need for this operation. 3-day tasking, wheels up in 6 hours. Interested? Yes, sir. Good. Let's get you briefed. That was the moment our relationship fractured beyond repair. Not because of what I did, but because of what he'd revealed about himself in front of 200 witnesses. He'd tried to humiliate me publicly, to reassert dominance in the one arena where his rank should have guaranteed it. And he'd discovered that authority and respect aren't the same thing, that the power he'd assumed was absolute had limits he hadn't imagined. I didn't feel triumphant walking out of that auditorium. I felt tired and sad and something like relief. The pretense was over. No more trying to translate my worth into his language. No more shrinking myself to fit his expectations. He knew who I was now, and the knowing had cost him something he couldn't recover. My father didn't speak to me after the briefing. Not that day, not the week after. I completed the 3-day operation with Captain Hale's team, a precision operation that went exactly as planned, then returned to my regular duties. The official notification Lieutenant Colonel Rourke received praised the interagency cooperation and specifically mentioned my performance. Rourke forwarded it to me with a brief note. "Well done, Ghost." My mother left a message saying my father was confused. I let it sit in my voicemail for 2 days before listening to it. Her voice was careful, diplomatic in the way of military spouses who'd spent decades navigating command politics. "Honey, your father he's having trouble processing what happened at the briefing. He'd like to talk to you when you have time. Call when you can." I didn't call. There wasn't confusion to clear up. He'd humiliated me publicly, and the room full of witnesses had watched his certainty collapse. That wasn't confusion. That was consequence. I ran into CMSGT Elena Brooks in the hallway outside my office 4 days later. She was my unit senior enlisted leader, a career intelligence specialist who'd been in for 26 years and had forgotten more about reconnaissance operations than most officers would ever learn. She had a reputation for directness that officers either appreciated or feared. "Got a minute, Ghost?" she asked. We stepped into an empty conference room. She closed the door and leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Word travels," she said. "About what happened at MacDill." I figured. "Your father's a major general." "Yes." "And he didn't know who you were professionally." "No." She studied me for a long moment. "Some men collapse when they learn their shadow isn't the biggest one in the room." It wasn't meant to comfort me, but it clarified something I hadn't wanted to face. My father had built his identity around being the most accomplished person in any space he occupied. His authority had been unquestioned for so long that he'd stopped distinguishing between rank and respect, between position and actual influence. And I'd existed in his narrative as a supporting character, someone whose role was to reflect his success, not generate my own. "He'll either grow from this or he won't," Brooks continued. "But that's his choice, not your responsibility. You've built something real, Ghost. Don't let his inability to recognize it diminish what you've done." "I appreciate that, Chief." "One more thing," she said, moving toward the door. "That's ill, Captain? Hale?" He sent a message through channels. Said you were the most professional operator he'd worked with in 5 years, and if we ever want to loan you out again, he'll make it happen. That's rare praise from that community. She left before I could respond. I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the bland military issue furniture, and let myself acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. I replayed years of missed ceremonies, brushed off achievements, and his condescending tone. Every accomplishment I'd shared, every milestone I'd reached, filtered through a lens that refused to see me as competent. I'd assumed it was about military culture, about his generation's discomfort with women in non-traditional roles. But it was simpler and more painful than that. He needed me to be less successful than him. My achievements threatened his self-concept. I recognized how much of my life had been structured around winning respect from someone who had no intention of ever giving it. The phone calls reporting progress. The carefully worded emails detailing assignments without violating classification. The hope that maybe this time, this accomplishment, would be enough to earn genuine approval. All of it had been wasted effort, energy poured into a relationship that was never going to balance. I stopped calling, stopped reporting every milestone. I didn't make a formal announcement, didn't explain the decision to anyone. I just quietly withdrew from the exhausting work of seeking his validation. My mother called twice more over the next 3 weeks. I answered once, kept the conversation brief. She asked if I was angry. I told her I wasn't, which was true. Anger required investment, required caring about changing the situation. I'd moved past anger into something colder and more final, acceptance. "Your father wants to explain," she said. "There's nothing to explain, Mom." He said what he meant. The only surprise was that other people heard it. He didn't realize I'd built a career he couldn't see. I interrupted gently. "I understand that. But his ignorance doesn't obligate me to educate him, and his embarrassment doesn't require my forgiveness." She was quiet for a moment. "You sound different." "I'm tired," I said. "I've been tired for a long time." After we hung up, I sat at my desk and worked through the operational reports that actually mattered. Tasking orders for an upcoming exercise. Intelligence assessments that required my review. A request from another joint unit asking if I was available for a training mission in 3 months. Real work, evaluated by people who understood its value. I realized the only approval that mattered was mine. And the people who actually knew my work already respected it. Captain Hale had proven that. CMSGT Brooks had reinforced it. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke signed my evaluations with language that would carry weight with promotion boards. That was enough. That had to be enough. The shift wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no closure conversation. Just a quiet boundary drawn, a decision to stop performing for an audience that refused to watch. I'd spent a decade trying to be visible to him. Now I'd let myself disappear from his narrative entirely, and the freedom that came with that choice felt like finally setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. When my father sent a terse message demanding an explanation for humiliating him, I waited 2 days before responding. The message came through email, which told me something. He couldn't pick up the phone, couldn't have the conversation directly. He needed the distance that text provided. His email was 3 paragraphs long. The first explained that he was owed respect as both a general officer and my father. The second detailed how my actions at the briefing had undermined his credibility with peers and subordinates. The third demanded I provide context for how I'd obtained clearances and qualifications he hadn't been informed about. I read it twice, let it sit, then wrote a single-sentence reply. My work is classified. You are not read in. I will not justify my service. I sent it and closed my laptop. No emotion. No apology. No lengthy explanation of why his demand was inappropriate on multiple levels. Just the boundary, stated clearly. His reaction came through multiple channels over the next week. My mother called, her voice strained. He's very upset, Cassandra. He feels you're being insubordinate. I'm not in his chain of command, I said. Insubordination isn't possible. You know what I mean. I do. And my answer stands. He doesn't have the clearance to know what I do. That's not me being difficult. That's how classification works. He escalated. Called my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, through official channels. Requested a meeting to discuss his daughter's career trajectory and the irregularities in my assignments. Rourke, to his credit, handled it professionally. He called me into his office, closed the door, and leaned back in his chair. Your father contacted me, he said. I figured he might. He wanted to know why you have clearances beyond his level. He wanted to know why you were pulled for that SEAL operation. He wanted to know, in his words, how an O3 captain obtained access to programs that general officers aren't read into. What did you tell him? I told him that personnel assignments and clearance levels are determined by operational requirements and mission needs, not by rank. I told him that questions about specific programs need to go through proper channels, which in this case means counterintelligence and program security offices he has no authority to contact. And I told him that any further inquiries about your career need to come from you directly, not through your chain of command. How did he respond? He didn't like it. Rourke smiled slightly. He tried to leverage rank. Suggested that as a major general, he had a right to oversight of Air Force personnel assignments. And I reminded him that I'm the appropriate commander for addressing concerns about officers in my unit, and that his relationship to you creates a conflict that precludes his involvement in your professional evaluation. I was polite about it. Mostly. I nodded slowly. Thank you, sir. Ghost, I'm going to be direct with you. Your father doesn't understand what you do, and that bothers him. He's trying to reassert control over a situation where he has none. That's his problem, not yours. Your performance in this unit has been exemplary. Your clearances are appropriate for your duties. And your reputation in the joint community is exactly what I want it to be. Don't let his discomfort make you doubt any of that. He dismissed me, but the message was clear. My father had tried to go around me, tried to use the system to force answers he wasn't entitled to receive, and the system had held. External pressure came from other sources. Family members tried to coax me into smoothing things over. My cousin Mia called, her voice careful. Your dad's really struggling with this, she said. I know. Maybe you could just talk to him? Explain things? There's nothing to explain that doesn't violate classification protocols. He's asking questions I'm legally prohibited from answering. But your family. Which is exactly why I can't discuss classified information with him. The rules don't have exceptions for relatives. They especially don't have exceptions for relatives who are senior military officers. She sighed. He's hurt, Cass. I understand that. But his feelings don't change my obligations. Certain senior officers hinted that I should be respectful of the general. I encountered it at a professional development event, a cocktail reception where a brigadier general I'd met twice before approached me near the bar. Heard about that situation at MacDill, he said casually. Tough spot. It was handled appropriately, sir. Your father's a respected officer. Might be worth considering how these things look from his perspective. I set my drink down carefully. Sir, with respect, my father made assumptions about my capabilities without ever asking about my work. When those assumptions were proven wrong publicly, he experienced natural embarrassment. That's unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility to manage his reaction. Family dynamics can be complicated. Yes, sir. Which is why I maintain clear professional boundaries and don't discuss classified programs with family members, regardless of their rank. He nodded slowly and changed the subject. The message was delivered and received. I wasn't going to apologize or soften my position to make senior officers comfortable. I made no statements. No denials. No explanations beyond what I'd already provided. Silence was my boundary, and I held it consistently. When people asked about the briefing incident, I said it had been resolved through proper channels. When they pressed for details, I politely declined to discuss it further. My father felt the consequences in ways he hadn't anticipated. Rumors spread quietly, a general who didn't even know who his daughter was professionally. Officers talked, the way they always do, especially about moments when someone's certainty gets publicly shattered. The story wasn't widespread, but within certain circles, it circulated. A major general who'd laughed at his daughter and told her she was nobody, only to learn she held credentials and clearances he didn't have access to. His credibility dimmed in certain circles where interpersonal leadership mattered. I heard about it third-hand, through a Navy commander I'd worked with who mentioned that some of the SEAL community had heard what happened. Your old man's getting a reputation, he said carefully. Not a good one. People are asking how a general didn't know his daughter was Ghost 13. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. Just tired recognition that actions have consequences, even for general officers, maybe especially for general officers whose leadership was being quietly questioned. My father's command climate reviews showed a pattern: dismissiveness, arrogance, a growing disconnect from his officers. I didn't see the reviews directly, but military communities are small. Information circulates. A captain I knew who worked in his headquarters mentioned it carefully over coffee. General Hartley's staff is struggling, she said. High turnover. People requesting transfers. Word is he's hard to work for. That's unfortunate, I said neutrally. There's talk about his leadership style. Some people are saying he doesn't value contributions from subordinates, that he dismisses input if it doesn't align with his preconceptions. She was giving me information without asking questions, letting me know what was being said. I appreciated the discretion. Leadership challenges happen at every level. Sure, she said. But when a general officer's command climate survey shows declining morale and trust, people notice. Especially when there are other incidents that make people question his judgment. She didn't mention the briefing specifically. She didn't have to. I understood what she was telling me. The public humiliation he'd tried to inflict on me had reflected back on him, had made people examine his behavior more critically. Junior officers whispered about the briefing incident. He couldn't control the narrative because he couldn't explain it without revealing his own assumptions had been wrong. Meanwhile, my path strengthened. I promoted to major at 33 with strong recommendations from Joint Commands. The promotion board results came out in March, and my name was on the primary list. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke called me into his office to congratulate me personally. You earned this, Ghost, he said. Your performance has been consistently exceptional. Your reputation in the joint community is outstanding. You're exactly the kind of officer the Air Force needs moving forward. My call sign was requested again for a separate mission set, this time by an Army Special Forces unit planning operations in a contested environment. The request came through formal channels, with specific mention of my previous performance and the clearances required. Rourke approved it immediately. The operation lasted 8 days. I worked with a team I'd never met before, integrating into their planning cycle and providing the precision capability they needed. The team leader, a major like myself, pulled me aside after the mission debrief. "You're good at this," he said simply. "Calm under pressure, precise when it matters. If we get tasked for something similar, I'm requesting you again." Captain Hale sent a note through official channels, copied to Rourke. Major Hartley proved reliable, precise, and professional throughout the operation. Request her participation in future joint tasking. She's an asset to any team. Coming from a Navy SEAL captain, that language carried significant weight. I observed my father's struggles indirectly: slowing influence, fewer invitations to advisory boards, rumors of early retirement. My mother mentioned during one of our infrequent calls that he was considering stepping down earlier than planned. "He's been in for 32 years, she said. "He's thinking about retiring at 35 instead of staying until they make him." "That's his choice," I said. "He's not happy, Cassandra." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. But his happiness isn't something I can fix, especially not by compromising my professional integrity or apologizing for having a career he didn't approve." She sighed. "I know. I just wish things were different." "Me too," I said, and meant it. I wished my father had been capable of respecting my accomplishments. I wished he'd asked about my work instead of dismissing it. I wished our relationship had been built on mutual respect instead of his need for dominance. But wishing didn't change reality. I didn't intervene in his career struggles. I didn't reach out to smooth things over or attempt reconciliation. He had built the system that now weighed him, had created an environment where rank substituted for respect, where authority replaced actual leadership. The consequences were his to manage. My confidence became clean, quiet, unforced. I moved through my work with the same precision I'd always had, but without the underlying anxiety about proving myself to someone who refused to see me. My performance reviews were strong. My assignments were challenging and meaningful. The operators I worked with trusted me, and that trust was earned through demonstrated confidence, not inherited through family connection. I no longer needed him to understand my worth. That realization settled into my bones slowly, became part of how I moved through the world. At professional events, I introduced myself by rank and name, let my work speak for itself. When people asked about my career, I gave straightforward answers without hedging or minimizing. When someone praised my performance, I accepted the compliment with simple thanks instead of deflecting. The change was internal, mostly invisible to others. But I felt it in every interaction, every decision, every moment when I chose my own judgment over his imagined criticism. I'd spent years trying to translate my worth into his language. Now I spoke my own language and let him struggle with the translation. At night, when the work was done and I sat in my apartment reviewing mission reports or planning upcoming operations, I sometimes thought about what we'd lost. Not the relationship we'd had, because that had been built on imbalance and unmet expectations. But the relationship we could have had if he'd been capable of seeing me as a peer, as a competent professional, as someone who'd chosen her own path and succeeded on her own terms. That loss was real. But it wasn't mine to grieve alone. He'd made choices too, and those choices had costs he was only beginning to understand. Months later, he requested a meeting, not as a general, but as a father. The message came through my mother, who called and asked if I'd be willing to see him. "He wants to talk," she said. "No expectations, no demands. Just conversation." I thought about it for 3 days before agreeing. We met at a coffee shop off base, neutral territory where rank meant nothing. He was waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table in civilian clothes. He looked older than I remembered, more worn. The authority he carried so naturally in uniform seemed diminished in khakis and a polo shirt. "Thanks for coming," he said when I sat down. "Mom said you wanted to talk." He nodded slowly, wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I misjudged you." I waited. Didn't make it easier for him. Didn't rush to fill the silence. "For years," he continued, "I thought I understood your career. I thought you were doing support work, intelligence analysis, something safe and routine. I thought you'd chosen an easy path. You never asked what I actually did, I said evenly. No, I didn't. He met my eyes finally. I assumed. And I let that assumption become certainty without ever checking if it was true. That was arrogant. Yes, it was. At the briefing, when you stood up and gave that call sign. He shook his head slowly. I knew that name. Not from anything classified, but from conversations I'd overheard, comments from SOCOM officers, the way certain people talk about operators they trust. I knew what it meant, and I realized I'd been completely wrong about who you were professionally. You humiliated me publicly, I said. You told a room full of officers I was nobody. You laughed when you said it. I know. He looked down at his coffee. I was trying to reassert control. You standing up challenged my authority in front of my peers, and I reacted defensively. It was wrong. It was more than wrong. It revealed what you actually think of me. Not just in that moment, but consistently. Every dismissive comment, every missed ceremony, every time you minimized my work, that briefing just made it public. You're right. His voice was rough. I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand why I did that, why I needed you to be less successful than you are. My therapist says it's about ego, about needing to be the most accomplished person in my family to feel secure. You're seeing a therapist? Mandatory, actually. My command climate survey was bad enough that I was required to complete leadership counseling. The therapist was recommended as part of that process. He smiled bitterly. Turns out being a general doesn't make you a good leader. Those are different skills. I didn't respond. Let him continue. I'm retiring, he said. 33 years in September. I could push for 35, maybe make a 3rd star, but honestly, I'm tired. And I'm not sure I'm the kind of leader the Air Force needs anymore. That's your decision to make. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I don't think I've earned that, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. And I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late for us. We sat in silence. Around us, the coffee shop continued its routine, espresso machine hissing, conversations overlapping, the mundane normality of civilian life that felt distant from the careful conversation we were having. What do you want from me? I asked finally. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe nothing. Maybe just for you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I'm sorry it took public humiliation for that to happen. I thought about what Elena Brooks had said, some men collapse when they learn their shadow isn't the biggest one in the room. My father was trying not to collapse completely, trying to build something from the rubble. That took a kind of courage I hadn't expected from him. I can't give you absolution, I said. And I can't go back to trying to earn your approval. That dynamic was unhealthy, and I won't recreate it. I understand. But I can offer limited contact. Occasional conversation. Updates on a schedule that works for both of us, with clear boundaries about what we will and won't discuss. I'll take that, he said quickly. My work stays classified. You don't get details, explanations, or special access. If you're not cleared for something, that's final. No arguments. Agreed. And respect must be shown, not assumed. You don't get to dismiss my career or minimize my accomplishments because they don't fit your understanding of military service. If you can't respect what I do without understanding the specifics, then we don't discuss it at all. That's fair. I studied him across the table, this man who'd shaped so much of my early life and then failed to recognize what I'd become. He looked diminished, humbled in ways I'd never imagined seeing. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad. This doesn't fix what happened, I said. I know. And it doesn't mean our relationship goes back to normal. There is no normal to go back to. We're building something new, and that takes time. I have time, he said. And I'd like to try if you're willing. We finished our coffee. Made plans to talk again in 2 weeks, a phone call with no pressure or expectations. He thanked me for coming and didn't try to hug me or create artificial closeness. Just a handshake, formal and appropriate, and then I left. Driving back to base, I felt something complex and unresolved. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not trust. But maybe the beginning of understanding that people can change, slowly and imperfectly, if they're willing to face what they've done. Whether my father could sustain that change remained to be seen. Years later, I'm a respected major with joint credentials and a reputation built quietly, cleanly, on merit. I've worked operations across 3 continents, supported teams from every service branch, and built a record that speaks for itself. My performance reviews consistently rank me in the top tier. My clearances have expanded as operational requirements evolved. My call sign is recognized in communities that matter. My unit trusts me. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke moved on to a colonel's position at Air Combat Command, but before he left, he told me, "You're the standard I measure other officers against, Ghost. Don't let anyone diminish that." His replacement, Colonel Sandra Mitchell, read my file before I ever met her, and her first words to me were, "I've heard good things. Let's keep that momentum going." Command relies on me. When joint operations require precision capabilities, my name appears on request lists. When interagency missions need someone who can work across classification boundaries, I get the call. It's not about rank or politics or family connection. It's about demonstrated competence, consistency, and the kind of trust that only gets built through repeated performance under pressure. Operators request me by call sign, not name. That matters more than any promotion, any award, any formal recognition. When a Navy SEAL team or an Army Special Forces unit or a Marine reconnaissance element asks for Ghost 13 specifically, that's professional respect that can't be faked or inherited. It's earned one operation at a time, one clean shot at a time, one mission where being reliable means someone else gets to go home. My father retired as planned, 33 years of service ending with a ceremony I attended but didn't speak at. He moved with my mother to Colorado, bought a house near Pikes Peak, and started the slow adjustment to civilian life. We talk occasionally, carefully structured conversations that stay within established boundaries. He asks general questions about my career. I provide general answers. He tells me about his consulting work, the veterans groups he's joined, his efforts to mentor younger officers transitioning out of service. It's not warm. It's not what either of us hoped for when I was young. But it's honest, and that matters more. He no longer tries to diminish my work or assert authority he doesn't have. I no longer seek approval he's not capable of giving appropriately. We've found an equilibrium that allows limited contact without the toxic dynamics that characterized our earlier relationship. He's learning to be a person instead of just a general. That process is harder than he expected, but he's doing the work. His therapist visits continue voluntarily now, no longer mandatory. He's reading books on leadership and emotional intelligence, trying to understand patterns he repeated for decades. My mother says he's different at home, more present, less rigid. I'm glad for him. His growth doesn't fix the past, but it suggests the past doesn't have to define everything that comes after. People can change if they choose to, if they're willing to face uncomfortable truths and do the hard internal work. Meanwhile, I've built a life that doesn't require his validation. I have a career that fulfills me professionally. I have colleagues who respect me. I have a reputation in the communities that matter. I've learned to value my own judgment, to trust my capabilities, to move through the world without constantly seeking external approval. Power isn't volume, rank, or reputation. That's what my father never understood until it was too late. Real power is clarity. Boundaries. The decision to stop shrinking for someone else's comfort. I learned that lesson the hard way, spent years trying to be visible to someone who refused to see me. But once I understood it, truly internalized it, everything changed. I stopped performing for audiences that didn't matter. Stopped translating my worth into others' languages. Stopped accepting treatment that diminished me. Justice came quietly, not through revenge, but through truth revealing itself in a single moment. The moment a Major General father realized the nobody he dismissed was Ghost 13, an operator whose silence carried more authority than his shouting ever did. That moment didn't fix our relationship, didn't heal years of dismissal and disappointment. But it did something more important. It freed me from needing his recognition to know my worth. Now, when I stand in briefing rooms or operational planning sessions, when I work with teams who request me specifically, when I take positions that require precision and trust, I don't think about what my father would say. I don't wonder if he'd approve or if this would finally be enough to earn his respect. I just do the work. I serve with integrity, operate with precision, and build relationships based on mutual respect and demonstrated confidence. And at the end of the day, when I review mission reports and prepare for the next tasking, I know something my younger self desperately needed to learn. The only approval that truly matters is the approval you give yourself, and the respect you earn from people who actually understand your work. My father learned that lesson too, eventually. He learned it publicly, painfully, in front of 200 witnesses who watched him realize his daughter wasn't the person he'd imagined. Some lessons only stick when they cost something. His cost him his certainty, his unquestioned authority, and the comfortable illusion that rank equals respect. Mine cost me years of effort trying to earn something that was never going to be freely given. But we both learned. And in the end, that's what matters. I'll write part 9 as a 3,000-word section set 10 years later. 10 years after the briefing incident, I'm a lieutenant colonel with 16 years of service and a career trajectory that looks nothing like what I imagined at 23. I command a joint reconnaissance unit at Langley Air Force Base, overseeing 43 personnel across 3 specialties: signals intelligence, human intelligence support, and precision tactical operations. My call sign follows me still, though fewer people use it now that I'm in a command position. Ghost 13 has become more legend than active operator, a name that surfaces in conversations between people who worked certain missions during certain years. My office overlooks the flight line. I can watch F-22s take off while reviewing personnel evaluations or operational plans. The view reminds me why I joined, why I stayed, why the work matters beyond the politics and bureaucracy. There are days when command feels like being buried in administrative requirements and risk assessments. Then something happens, a mission gets approved or an operator returns successfully from a difficult tasking, and I remember what we're actually doing. Lieutenant Colonel Cassandra Hartley. 05. Eligible for promotion to colonel in 2 years if the board goes well. My record is strong: successful command time, joint qualifications, operational experience that spans 4 theaters, recommendations from officers across 3 services. I've built exactly the career I wanted, even if the path looked nothing like traditional advancement. My father is 71 now, a decade into retirement. He and my mother still live in Colorado Springs, their house positioned so they can see the Air Force Academy from the back porch. He volunteers at the academy occasionally, mentoring cadets, speaking to leadership classes, trying to pass along lessons he learned too late in his own career. My mother says he's different now, genuinely different, not just performing improvement, but actually transformed by the decade of work he's put into understanding his failures. We talk monthly. Video calls, usually Sunday afternoons when both our schedules allow. The conversations last 30 to 40 minutes, never longer. We discuss books we've read, documentaries we've watched, general military news that's public knowledge. He asks about my health, my career satisfaction, whether I'm taking care of myself. I ask about his consulting work, the cadets he mentors, how he's managing his blood pressure. It's cordial, careful, bounded by rules we don't discuss, but both respect. He's never asked me to explain what happened in that briefing room. Never requested details about Ghost 13 or the operations that earned me the call sign. He's learned, slowly and with obvious effort, that some things aren't his to know. That accepting his daughter means accepting there are parts of her life he'll never access, and that's appropriate rather than insulting. 3 months ago, he called outside our normal schedule. A Tuesday evening, my phone ringing while I was finishing paperwork at home. I almost didn't answer. Seeing his name on the screen triggered a reflexive caution born from years of difficult conversations. "Cassandra," he said when I picked up. "Do you have a few minutes?" "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it elsewhere." He paused, and I heard something in his voice I couldn't identify immediately. The Academy asked me to give the keynote address at their leadership symposium next month. They want me to speak about command climate, ethical leadership, lessons learned from mistakes. I said yes. I set down my pen. "That's good. You'll do well. I'm going to talk about you," he said. Not by name, not with identifying details, but about what happened between us. About how I failed as a leader and as a father by dismissing someone's capabilities because they didn't match my expectations. How that failure cost me credibility and damaged someone I should have been supporting. I was quiet for a long moment, processing what he was saying. I wanted to ask your permission first, he continued. I know it's my story to tell in terms of what I did wrong, but it's your story too. If you're not comfortable with me discussing it publicly, even without naming you, I'll find a different topic. Why do you want to talk about it? Because it's the most important leadership lesson I ever learned, he said simply. And because cadets need to hear that rank doesn't protect you from being wrong, that authority without respect is hollow, and that the people you underestimate might be the most capable ones in the room. I spent 33 years believing rank was enough. It took losing my daughter's respect to understand that leadership is something you earn continuously, not something you deserve automatically. You haven't lost my respect completely, I said carefully. It's changed. It's conditional now. But it exists. I know. And I'm grateful for that, more than I've probably expressed. He cleared his throat. So, do I have your permission? Yes, I said. Tell the story. If it helps younger officers avoid making the same mistakes, that's valuable. Thank you. We talked for a few more minutes, then ended the call. I sat in my living room afterward, lights dim, thinking about the man my father had been and the man he was becoming. The transformation wasn't complete. Maybe it never would be. But the fact that he'd asked permission, that he'd recognized my stake in the narrative, suggested growth I'd once thought impossible. Last month, I attended a joint operations conference in Tampa, near MacDill Air Force Base. The irony wasn't lost on me. Different building, different year, but the same geographic area where my relationship with my father had publicly fractured. I was there to present on integration challenges in joint reconnaissance operations, a technical briefing that drew maybe 70 people. Captain Marcus Hale was in the audience. Now Commander Hale, an O5 like me, still with the SEALs, but in a staff position that brought him to more conferences and fewer operations. We'd crossed paths occasionally over the years, maintained professional respect, but never developed a personal friendship. After my briefing, he approached me near the coffee station. Colonel Hartley, he said. Good presentation. You've clearly spent time thinking about the bureaucratic obstacles. Commander Hale. Thank you. And yes, when you're trying to get three services to share intelligence seamlessly, bureaucracy becomes the primary enemy. He smiled slightly. I heard you took command of the reconnaissance unit at Langley. How's that going? It's going well. Different challenges than I expected, but good work. You miss being operational? I considered the question honestly. Sometimes. There's something clean about being the operator instead of the commander. You execute the mission, you trust your training, you come home. Command means you're responsible for 43 people's training, safety, career development, and mission success. The stakes feel heavier. But you're good at it. I'm learning to be good at it, I corrected. There's a difference. We talked for a few more minutes about joint operations challenges, then he shifted topics slightly. I heard your father's giving talks at the academy. About leadership failures and course correction. He is. That takes courage, Hale said. Admitting you were wrong publicly, especially for someone who spent 3 decades building authority. I respect that. So do I admit it. It doesn't fix the past, but it suggests he understands the weight of what happened. Does it change things between you? It makes limited relationship possible, I said carefully. We're not close. We probably never will be. But we can talk civilly, which is more than I thought we'd achieve 5 years ago. Hale nodded slowly. For what it's worth, that briefing 10 years ago, watching you stand up when he told you to sit down, watching you state your call sign like it was the simplest fact in the world, that was one of the most professionally impressive things I've witnessed. You didn't flinch. Didn't justify. Just stood in your competence and let the truth speak. I was angry, I said quietly. I wanted him to know exactly who he'd dismissed. Maybe. But you channeled that anger into precision. That's the mark of a real operator. He checked his watch. I should get to my next session. Good seeing you, Colonel. You too, Commander. He walked away, and I stood there with my coffee, thinking about that day 10 years ago. How young I'd been at 33, how certain that proving myself would somehow repair the relationship. I'd learned since then that proof doesn't fix broken dynamics, that respect can't be demanded or demonstrated into existence. It has to be offered freely, and some people aren't capable of that until they've lost something irretrievable. My unit at Langley is strong. I've built it carefully over 18 months of command, learning which personnel need direct guidance and which need autonomy, how to balance operational requirements with training needs, when to push back against higher headquarters, and when to accept limitations I can't change. Command is harder than I expected and more rewarding than I imagined. 3 weeks ago, one of my senior NCOs, a master sergeant named Shin, came to my office with a personal problem. His daughter had just commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army, and his relationship with her was strained. She felt he'd been too controlling during her academy years, too dismissive of her choices, too invested in shaping her career according to his vision. "I don't know how to fix it, ma'am," he said, sitting across from my desk with the kind of defeated posture I'd never seen from him operationally. I was trying to help her avoid mistakes, trying to guide her toward success, and somehow I pushed her away instead. I thought about my father, about the years of dismissal and control disguised as guidance. "Can I offer some perspective, Master Sergeant? Please. Your daughter doesn't need you to shape her career. She needs you to respect the career she's building. There's a difference between mentoring and controlling, between offering guidance when asked and imposing your vision of success onto someone else's life. I just wanted her to have opportunities. She has opportunities," I interrupted gently. "She's a commissioned officer in the United States Army. She's capable, educated, and starting a career she chose. What she needs from you now is trust. Trust that she can navigate challenges, make good decisions, learn from mistakes. Your job isn't to prevent her from failing. It's to be someone she can come to when she needs support, without fear of judgment or an 'I told you so.'" He was quiet for a moment. "How do I rebuild that trust?" "You start by apologizing for overstepping. You acknowledge that you let your anxiety about her success override her autonomy. And then you step back and let her lead her own life, offering guidance only when she asks for it." "That's harder than it sounds." "Yes, I agreed. It is. But the alternative is losing the relationship entirely." "Ask me how I know." He looked at me with sudden understanding. "Your father." I nodded. My father and I didn't speak for years because he couldn't respect my career choices. We have a limited relationship now, cordial but distant, because he finally learned to accept that my success doesn't have to look like his success. But we lost time we can't recover, and our relationship will never be what it could have been if he'd trusted me earlier. I don't want that with my daughter. Then change your approach now, while there's still time to rebuild." He thanked me and left. I hope he follows through. I hope his daughter gives him the chance to do better. Not everyone gets that opportunity. My relationship with my father continues to evolve slowly. 2 months ago, he sent me a book, The Road to Character, by David Brooks, with a note tucked inside. The note was handwritten, his precise military printing somehow more personal than typed text. "Cassandra, this book helped me understand the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues, the difference between what we achieve and who we are. I spent too many years focused on the former and neglecting the latter. I'm trying to do better. Thank you for giving me the space to try." Dad, it was the first time he'd signed a communication to me as Dad instead of Raymond or General Hartley Rhett in years. The informality felt earned rather than presumed, a small marker of progress. I read the book, underlined passages that resonated, found myself thinking about my own balance between achievement and character, between the career I'd built and the person I was becoming. Command forces those reflections. When you're responsible for other people's careers and well-being, you can't hide behind competence alone. You have to be someone worth following, someone whose judgment extends beyond technical proficiency into ethical leadership. I'm learning that daily. Making mistakes, correcting course, trying to be the kind of commander I wish I'd had during difficult years. When I see junior officers struggling with imposter syndrome or family pressure or the gap between their aspirations and their current reality, I try to offer the support I didn't receive. Not by solving their problems, but by believing in their capability to solve problems themselves. Last week, during a routine operational briefing, one of my junior officers, a captain named Rodriguez, presented an alternative approach to a reconnaissance tasking that contradicted my initial guidance. The room got quiet. Other officers watched to see how I'd respond to being challenged. I listened to her full presentation, asked clarifying questions, then said, "Your approach is better than mine. Let's implement it." The relief in the room was palpable. Rodriguez looked simultaneously surprised and vindicated. After the briefing, my deputy commander pulled me aside. "That was good leadership, ma'am. A lot of commanders would have defended their original plan just to maintain authority. Authority that requires always being right isn't real authority," I said. "It's just ego." Rodriguez had a better idea. "Using it makes the mission more likely to succeed. That matters more than my pride." He nodded slowly. "Your father would have defended his plan." "The old version of my father would have," I agreed. "I'd like to think the current version would do what I did. But yes, for most of his career, he would have seen changing his mind as weakness. And you see it as strength." "I see it as reality. Nobody has all the answers. Good leaders recognize good ideas regardless of where they come from." That night, during my monthly call with my father, I told him about the briefing exchange. He listened quietly, then said, "You're a better commander than I was. You don't know that. You've never seen me command. I know it because of how you handled that captain's input. I would have felt threatened by a junior officer contradicting me. I would have found ways to maintain my authority even if it meant using a suboptimal plan. You focused on the mission instead of your ego. That's maturity I didn't achieve until after retirement. You're being generous to me and harsh on yourself." "No," he said. "I'm being honest about both of us. You learned lessons I should have taught you but didn't. You became a leader despite my example, not because of it. That's an achievement, Cassandra. Don't minimize it." The conversation stayed with me. My father had spent a decade examining his failures, working to understand patterns he'd repeated for 33 years. The insight he'd gained came too late to change his active duty career, but maybe it wasn't too late to influence mine. Maybe his mistakes could become my advantage, his failures could inform my success. 2 weeks from now, I'm scheduled to attend his keynote address at the Air Force Academy Leadership Symposium. He doesn't know I'm coming. I debated telling him, decided the surprise was appropriate. I want to hear what he says about our story, how he frames the lessons he learned, whether he's truly internalized the changes he claims to have made. I'm also curious whether I'll feel anger listening to him discuss our fractured relationship with an auditorium full of cadets. Whether old wounds will surface, whether his public processing of private pain will feel exploitative or honest. I won't know until I'm sitting there, listening to him admit failures that cost him a relationship with his daughter. Part of me hopes he succeeds, hopes his presentation helps young officers avoid making his mistakes. Part of me remains guarded, protective of the hard-won boundaries that make our current relationship sustainable. Both parts can be true simultaneously. This morning, I promoted one of my staff sergeants to technical sergeant. During the ceremony, with her family watching and her unit gathered in formation, I pinned on her new rank and told her, "You earn this through consistent excellence and leadership that inspires trust. Your team respects you because you've demonstrated competence and character. That's the foundation of real authority. Congratulations, technical sergeant." Her eyes watered slightly. After the ceremony, she approached me privately. "Thank you for what you said, ma'am. My father's a retired chief master sergeant, and he's never quite approved of my career choices. He wanted me to go officer route. Hearing you emphasize that I've earned respect in my current track meant a lot. Your father's approval isn't required for your success," I said gently. "It's nice when family supports us, but ultimately you're building a career that has to satisfy you, not him. Keep being excellent at what you do. The respect of the people you serve with matters more than the approval of people who don't understand your work." She nodded, understanding I was speaking from experience. These conversations happen more often than I expected when I took command. People carry family baggage into their military service, struggle with parental expectations that don't align with their choices, work to prove themselves to audiences who will never be satisfied. I can't fix those dynamics, but I can model a different approach. Self-authorization, boundaries, the decision to value competence over approval. 10 years after that briefing at McDill, I'm no longer trying to prove anything to my father. I've built a career that speaks for itself, earned respect from communities that matter, developed into a leader whose authority comes from demonstrated competence rather than rank alone. My relationship with my father exists in limited form, cordial and boundaried, better than nothing but far from close. That's enough. It has to be enough. Some relationships don't get fairy tale endings. Some damage can't be fully repaired, only managed. My father and I will never have the relationship we could have had if he'd respected me earlier, if he'd asked about my work instead of dismissing it, if he'd seen me as a competent professional instead of an extension of his legacy. But we have what we have: monthly calls, careful conversations, mutual respect within strict boundaries. He's working to be better. I'm allowing him space to demonstrate that improvement without requiring it to heal wounds that scarred years ago. And I'm building my own legacy, commanding with principles I learned partly from his failures. Teaching junior officers and NCOs that leadership requires humility, that authority without respect is hollow, that the people you underestimate might be the most capable ones in the room. 10 years later, Ghost 13 has become Lieutenant Colonel Hartley, commander, mentor, leader. The call sign surfaces occasionally in conversations with people who worked certain missions, but mostly it's retired, a marker of who I was before I understood that real power comes from building others up rather than proving yourself exceptional. My father's learning that too, a decade late, but still learning. Maybe that's the real lesson. It's never too late to change, to grow, to become someone better than who you were. The cost of change increases the longer you wait, relationships strained or broken along the way, but the possibility remains. I'm living proof that you can build authority from confidence, respect from consistency, and leadership from genuine care about the people you serve. My father's becoming proof that even generals can learn humility, even after retirement, even after losing what they should have valued most. Neither of us is perfect. Both of us are trying. 10 years later, that's enough. That's how it happened, how one moment stripped everything bare and forced me to stand on my own terms. I didn't plan the fallout, but I don't regret the choices that followed. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone who thought they outranked you emotionally? Have you ever shocked someone who underestimated you? Did they change, or did you just walk away? Drop your story in the comments. And if this hit home, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story about reclaiming your voice and taking your power back.